Good afternoon. It's hot in here, right? Am I coming through okay? Everything all right? All right. So I just want to touch on this gentleman right here. I'm sorry, I didn't catch his first name again. Ben? Ben. Gotcha. Okay, so this gentleman is on the National Association of Soil Districts, the National, NACD. So when we have local supervisors like Waco, Tyrell, you said no, different word. Okay, so we have local people and then we have national people that serve as environment also. And we need folks in those environments. So we just at Menoken Farm we just hosted NACD. So they were a great group and we enjoyed having them. And so it's a real opportunity. But we can't do this alone. I can tell you from trying, you can't do it alone. You need a team. You need a team. And then you can make some progress, get some traction. Okay? So the slaking of the aggregates has started to occur. So when we're done, we'll take a look at and see at the water stable aggregates or lack thereof. Okay? So we'll do that at the end. So, somewhere here we might need to, there we go. All right, so, that's just one of our perennial fields. So we hosted U.S. Fish and Wildlife Regional Tour in busloads the other day and clipped some frames in our perennial and we had some conversation there on the grazing system. And this is a picture of Kenny Miller. He was one of our longtime team members. He was the premier grazer in North Dakota. Premier grazer. And he's no longer with us, but was a real asset for the resource. And if you had a grazing question, this is your guy. And he was very committed to it. So, on the Menoken Farm, what is it? It's a conservation demonstration farm. So it's kind of a throwback to what we started with in agriculture in the U.S. We originally had demonstration farms before we had soil districts. So there were demonstration farms. And they ran for a number of years and it was determined they were ineffective with adoption. So they felt there wasn't adoption coming out of them. Roosevelt passed legislation, created soil districts. And they went forward. So Menoken Farm is kind of a throwback to the demonstration farm days, right? So it's a conservation demonstration farm, right? So it's rather unique in that. So it has an arboretum, okay, and various trees and shrubs. It's dedicated to Kenny Miller, you know, our longtime grazer. And so the arboretum is great. And of course everything gets labeled and you have all the diversity. And most trees grow really well in North Dakota, but we were never a tree state. We were always prairie, right? Most likely, bison and grasshoppers kept plant succession from occurring, kept moving it back to prairie areas. Okay? But the arboretum is very popular, so a lot of groups come, or even individuals, they want to plant a shelter belt for whatever purpose, and they do browsing before they start planting with one of our urban planners. Okay? So, the arboretum. We have a rain garden because we got a big urban emphasis now, and of course there's 100,000 people sitting in Bismarck Mandan, so this whole thing, how do we use less water? This one has rock mulch. I don't really like rock mulch. Why? Because it has a lot of what in the summertime? It retains heat tremendously, right? So it's not my favorite, but yeah, it's a mulch. I like a wood mulch better, but this is the rainwater run that comes off the roof and feeds this water garden, okay? And you surround it with hydrophytic plants and flowering plants, and you create an island of life in your backyard. So this is for urban folks, Bismarck Mandan, but it's also farms and ranches in Burley County surrounding area. They'll take it and use it on their operation. So it's a nice way to illustrate it. Water feeds in it, and then you surround it with plants, and it works. So this is one we talked a little bit about in the field when this conversation came up in the insect world. And so this beetle bank has really been interesting. So are you familiar with Xerxes Society? Anyone here of Xerxes Society? Some of you? Okay. So in there, one of their handbooks talks about a beetle bank. And at first I thought we were 1960s, but no, it's not. Okay. So this is different beetle, right? So the beetle bank, biological pest control. And so we got to set the scenario for it. What do they like? What do they use? Okay. There's 24,000 species in North America alone. There's hundreds of thousands in the world, but North America alone, 24,000 species. Vast majority of these are very good, right? And so if you decide to kill the one bad one, you're going to take a lot of good guys with you. And so we try to create a scenario. So it has to be bunch grasses. Okay, so I used all native bunch grasses. Big blue, little blue, cypress, Indian grass, etc. I think I have those right there. And so big blue stem, side oak switch, little blue, and Indian. And then I added 5 local flowering forms, all native, because we never water it. Okay? They're native plants, don't need water. So we can get a little more frugal with our water. Okay? I put down the fabric because I wanted weed control till they got established. And then we'll pull that off. But you're looking at a scenario where those were planted last year as plugs. So you can order plugs from the nursery. That's a bigger jump than a seed and much higher success rate. So you take your plug and pop it in. And if you put in 100 plugs, probably 99 of them will grow. If you put 100 seeds in the ground, you're not going to get 99 of those to grow, right? So we're just looking at accelerating a little bit. So with that too, going back to this first one, it should have a bit of a raise. And so this was painful for me, but I actually disturbed the soil and I raised it in the center. 1/2 foot to 3/4 of a foot, just a little gentle raise in the center. And then it's about 6 feet wide, 300 feet long. That'll impact a huge surrounding area. And so you want the rise, so in the spring when the snow and ice and everything is leaving, it doesn't get into their pore spaces, their homes, if you will. Okay? So a little bit of a rise so the water drains off. And then when urban people do it, because we'll sell them or give them plugs, warm season native grasses, which are beautiful. You can see the Indian grass on the right there, and the big blue on the left, and the bergamot in the front. So we'll give them 3, 4, 5 of these plants, and they'll put a beetle bump in their backyard. A beetle bump, right? Was that too much for you? Maybe you weren't ready for that. So it's just a little smaller environment, and very effective. But we got to have this habitat. We got to create a habitat. Okay, so we have a beetle bank. We also have an outdoor garden. And you can note on these first 3 rows of corn are a little more robust than this row. Okay, that's because these 3 were on the potato alfalfa from the previous year. And so wherever the alfalfa is on the potatoes, that's the most nutrient-rich part of the garden. As the alfalfa decomposes into the soil, they're adding carbon and nutrient. Okay? Then we come along, here's the potatoes. They're just laying on the soil surface and they're covered with alfalfa. And it's all you need. And then we'll put the corn on there the following year.
Alfalfa hay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep, alfalfa hay. And so I've used straw before, but with our winds, I like the alfalfa. It's a lot more stable. The straw works, but it's not as nutrient dense, doesn't decompose as quickly, and so, but the alfalfa's worked out really well. And then we have raised beds. Sometimes you don't have good soils. Our urban gardeners or even rural gardeners, sometimes we'll just raise the beds with square bales, and I'll fill them with compost and soil. So I'll use a 1/3 compost, 2/3 soil mixture. You can grow anything in there. And so then I put a mulch on top of it, again, of alfalfa hay, get an armor on the surface and a drip line, and what do you want to grow? So we like that environment. Milpa, that's one we borrowed from Green Cover Seeds. That works. We can do the Milpa thing as well. We can do the high tunnel. Let me just back up here. So on the right, you can see this is a paper mulch. Okay. So you remember your grade school days, the construction paper? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really just like construction paper. So you order it in 48-inch rolls, and then you just unroll it. So when we unrolled it, we rolled it right over, if it was an inch or 2-inch high weed, you just rolled it right over top of the weeds. And then we went ahead and planted into it. So if it's a transplant, you know, you buy those little augers now. So you just make a little X in the paper and you take that little auger and put your transplant in. So it's a pretty neat way to garden.
So what do you got into the bales?
In between the bales is compost soil.
Okay.
Yep, compost soil mixture, about 2/3, 1/3. I never use 100% compost. That's not a good situation typically. It's just too rich and not enough structure. Right? So you add some soil in with it, and then your plant diversity can be whatever. And the milk. Okay. We also do a high tunnel. So it's not a huge one. It's 48 by 24. It's not a huge high tunnel. But inside we do companion planting. So everything's got a buddy. Nothing goes in as a monoculture. So everything's got a friend. Okay? So whether it's onions and carrots, leeks and spinach, cucumber and dill, chives and carrots, everything likes something. We like to use, tomatoes love carrots. If you've read the book, Tomatoes Love Carrots, it's a good book. Talks all kinds of companion planting. Okay? It's a good starter book. Great starter book. And then from there you can integrate the herbs and go as crazy as you want to get. Also the flowers on the left, the flowers become real important for color. Got to have colors. So orange, red, yellow, pink, blue, get the colors. And we got Swiss chives on the right. Colors are important. We keep the doors open, let the insect world in. Balsams. Balsam is probably my favorite because it's got multiple colors in it. Balsams and zinnias are good too. And then always a cover crop. And so if you don't use a cover crop in a high tunnel, you typically are going to have some type of salinity issue. So what happens is you don't get the big rain in the high tunnel. You don't get any rain there. And so you're watering with drip line, right? You're being frugal with your water, right? And so you're watching all that, but what happens is you don't get the big flush. So you don't get that inch or two rain that moves some water down in the profile and moves salts down too. So in the end of the year, I'll put the cover crops in. I'll water them enough to get them going, and then I'll let them harvest out all the water in that box. And then I can flush it. Then I can bring some water. Makes sense? And then also you're building back all the aggregates now. And I'm breaking up the disease cycle now. So if I can build aggregates, I can bring the carbon levels back. Okay? So once I put in 1/3 compost, 2/3 soil into those boxes, I've never touched them again. I just recycle. So it's just a recycle. And then I terminate by taking away the sunlight. So it's an easy deal. Take away the sunlight, 10 days later, you're ready to plant. Okay? And then I'll take a scissors and I'll cut through the residue like a residue manager in front of a planter. Right? Same thing. So you cut a trail through it, and that's where you're going to plant. So that water becomes kind of even more interesting, but this is a good example of guttation water. So if you're familiar with guttation water, the water comes out of these hydrophones, okay? So when the stomata closes, and this happens for our plants in cropland, right? When the stomata closes at night, sun goes down, stomata closes, creates a pressure, okay? it's going to drive water up, and it's going to come out of these hydrophones, and there are these large openings on the leaf edge. Okay, so that's guttation water. So when you're using something systemic, or if you're using an insecticide or a fungicide that's systemic in a plant, that's where the insects harvest their water. That's why that's kind of a concern. Okay. And then that's one form of water, and then transpiration is another, okay? That's the water coming out of the stomata during the daytime, water vapor. As CO2 comes in, water vapor comes out, and evaporation out of a bare soil. So North Dakota was underwater geologically for a long time, and so we have geological salts in our soils. And so if we have transpiration, we have no problems. But when we have evaporation, salinity occurs in our fields, and our yields drop. So it becomes a very monitoring thing that's really good to keep an eye on. So our cropland fields, that's also part of Menoken Farm. There's 10 cropland fields, and this is one where this one is 60-inch corn. 3 days after the corn was planted, we put in the alfalfa. And so it's been really interesting to watch it use water, because it is using water. That alfalfa now is up to my knee. The corn I can't reach anymore, but the alfalfa is up to my knee. I'm waiting for the corn to drop. And I'm wondering how it made it this far. But it's still there. I'm going like, come on, when are you going to drop? Right? And so normally our cover crops, we normally put them in more like B5, B6. And so the corn's much further along, and so the cover crop comes in much later. You end up using less water. And so it's always balanced, but this one's alfalfa, 100% stand. I think every seed took off. I don't think there's one seed that didn't grow. They all took off. Every pound of alfalfa is 5 seeds a square foot. And so the old NRCS seeding rate was 25 seeds a square foot. And you're hoping to get 2-3 plants out of that 25 seeds. And that's at 5.5 in our neck of the woods, 5.5 PLS pounds per acre. That's a full seeding rate. That's 25 seeds. And we use that, and I think every plant, every seed took off. But it's ready for livestock integration at the end of the year as well. Normally it's annuals, but this one's a perennial. So Tyrell, when you were there last year, I think it was annuals. So our spring wheat, we do some spring wheat on 15s and put it in with the planter. And we do field pea. I put them in at 15 with the planter. So, but they all hook together, right? If I shake those peas by my spade, a couple hundred feet in, they're still moving, you know, because they all hook together. That's yellow pea. We have a pretty good market for yellow pea north of Bismarck. And then a multi-species cover crop, so that'll be grazed this fall. So that one I took not too long ago. And our spring wheat is maybe a couple weeks off, a couple weeks. The peas are getting close to 2 weeks as well, be real close. Okay. Soybean, so on the left is soybean. So you can see the planter did a pretty good job of cutting that residue. So we got it in our environment. If I don't have residue, I don't grow much for crop. I got to have cover. Okay. For a number of reasons. And then Mr. Griffin, there's your field right there. So I'm standing in that one. That one we planted solid. We've done rows and we've done solid. We can make either one work. Either one. Sunflower and covers, and usually the covers amounts to about 7 or 8 different broadleaves in with the sunflowers. And then they all freeze down, the flowers stay standing, and everything else kind of goes down, and we have no separation at harvest time. And when the combine leaves, the yearlings come in. What's not to like on that system? That's not a bad system. We also do compost. So we do conventional turned and we do static. Okay, so the Johnson Sioux static compost makers, we use those. Got to have aeration in them, but there's no turning in those. And then we do conventional turn. So it's a demonstration farm. So when people come about compost, they are all over the board on what, how and what and why. So we try to have some more than one system in place if we can. Okay. And so we do conventional and we do other. Those are kind of our usual and normal products that we use. Biochar, I don't normally use that, but North Dakota Forest Service gave us some biochar, so I sneak it into the compost, maybe 5% or so, because it populates. If you put it directly in the soil, all the nutrients get locked into its forks. If you put it in compost first, that's more forgiving, and let it be in there for about a year, and then it'll eventually go out. So nice additional feature. And then I always take some old compost, completed compost, put it into the new when you're making it, because then you're pre-inoculating. You're bringing all that biology into the new, okay, that you already have when you completed it, right? And then we do bio-inoculants. That's a real simple one I used for a few years, and I ran the high tunnel with it and the outdoor garden with it. So I would inoculate all the seed with the leachate. So in that big tub is compost and worms, and it's becoming vermicompost. And I also have air infiltration tubes in there, cardboard tubes in there for air. And then there's no moving parts. I just gravity flow. I collect the leachate. So it's vermicompost leachate. And then I use the rainwater that doesn't go to the rain garden, it goes into this garden. And then we can use it for the bio-inoculant. So that's how I ran the garden for a few years, and I liked what I saw. So I would inoculate the seed. You want the seed inoculated before it germinates.
You used it as a foliar?
We used it as an inoculant on the seed, and then in the garden we used it as 2 foliars during the year. Yes. So to answer your question, yes, we did use it that way as well, as a foliar. So then we liked what we saw in the garden, so we went a little larger scale and we said, let's do the 10 cropland fields. And so this is enough to generate quite a few gallons. So this is a 12-foot wide pad, slopes to the center, and it's about 120 feet long, slopes to the other end, and it goes into a drain. And into that drain exits into an insulated livestock tank with an insulated cover on it, set into the ground, so it keeps it cool. And so what you have in here is an alfalfa cover on top of this compost with the tile drains in it for aeration. And then we put the worms on it, cover it with alfalfa, and then we put a couple drip lines on top. If it quits raining, we can still add a little water to it on occasion. And that creates the bio-inoculant. Now you're catching the leachate. Okay. I got into that with, so we had a German farmer group come visit us, and this German farmer says to me, he said, when we went to East Germany, he said after the wall came down, he said, we went to East Germany. We wanted to see what they did or didn't have and exchange information, and he said relatives and all this, you know. And he said their hogs looked amazing. And he said, why do your hogs look so great? You have access to nothing. You couldn't buy anything. Why do your hogs look so great? I said, I've never seen a hog look so healthy. And he said, we catch the leachate from the silage. And I got thinking about that. Makes a lot of sense, right? You're catching, you made silage, you packed silage, drained off, you know, it drains off usually. And so we started doing that leachate with the vermicompost. So we put completed compost on there. I add the worms. I get those from Uncle Jim's worm farm, no relation. And then we'll go ahead and cover them with alfalfa. That was a little quick, I'm sorry. So then we'll cover that with alfalfa and a little bit of water. And they don't want sunlight, but they want to be on the surface. So they're red wigglers and European night crawlers. And then it ends up in here where I put a submersible in, and I can pump it into our liquid tank. And so that's the microbes, okay? So the microbes are in there. And then I send it to the Molecular Research DNA Lab in Shallowater, Texas. And there they'll do complete DNA analysis of everything in there that has DNA. And you get a printout. And there's usually around 300 species. roughly half bacteria, roughly about half fungi. Real close. So that's the microbes. So if you're going to have microbes, I gotta feed them. I gotta have food for them. They're the workers. So the microbes are the workers. I'm going to put them into the cropland now. I've had them in the garden, but now I'm going to put them in the cropland. Okay, so I gotta have carbon. Well, what's my carbon going to be? Well, there's different sources. So I started with molasses. That's a pretty simple carbon, but it's water soluble because this is going to all go liquid. So I need to keep it water soluble. And then do I need nutrient or not? That's where I use sap analysis. So on a Monday morning, I'll go out and take sap analysis in the cornfield. You pull out the oldest functioning leaf and the newest functioning leaf. 80 grams of each. That's your analysis. You pack it into the nice pack, you overnight it, and they will send you a nice printout of everything that that plant is doing in about 3 to 4 days. And then I know what kind of foliar I'm going to put in. So if I'm not showing that I need anything too particular, I might just give the microbes and the carbon. If I'm short on something, I can add fish emulsion and compute the math on it in terms of NPK if I need to add something. And so it allows an early detection, early warning, if you will. And so it allows for a very ridiculously low amount of nutrient being put in. Okay? So microbes, carbon, nutrients, and then we added the covers with the 60-inch corn because then eventually we handed it off to the covers. So, all right. So this is just pumping out of the tank and into the planter. Here we're putting it on as a foliar. So we'll put a couple foliars on the crop. Then we'll use some soil health assessment. How am I doing? So this is a how am I doing in terms of the soil. So I'll be taking a look at that early on. And I know what I got then, right? So I know what I have, nothing new about that. And then the PLFA, that's the workers. And since I'm using the microbes, this one gets pretty important to me because I'm using microbes and I want to see what I have. So this is the workers. So I take a look at the workers. I pay particular attention to what I have for saprophytic fungi and what I have for mycorrhizal fungi. Saprophytic is what eats the dead litter. Mycorrhizal is what connects to a green plant. Okay? So this becomes important to me because of using the microbes. And then the plant sap tells me how the plant is doing. It takes a little time. You know, go out and pull the samples, takes a little time. Second time you do it, it's a lot quicker because you need 80 grams, the leaves are bigger, so it goes along pretty fast the second time. And you get that kind of printout back, so you have an idea what's going on in your plant.
How many samples do you collect
So
in a given area?
So 80 grams.
80 grams period.
80 grams of the oldest functioning leaf and 80 grams of the newest functioning leaf.
Over how much area do you?
So it's these are 12-acre fields.
Okay.
And so I have an area in each one that is the sampling area.
Okay.
Yep. And now another one thing we use, and again, it's demonstration farm, so this is a visual evaluation of soil structure. It's called BEST.
We've got that in the bucket.
You got that in the bucket, all right. And so I'll go ahead and I'll pull soils from all 10 fields, and then there's a procedure. And you have a visual, and it shows you, and it's also by field because it's how crumbly it is. And then it's also got the photos, okay? And you end up putting a numerical score on it. So we brought in everyone that works there, or any board member or anyone who could, and then we did it together, and we ranked all the fields. And so they all have a numerical best number. And then we'll take the poorest one, and that'll become our next perennial field. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we take our poorest one, goes to perennials. Rotational perennials, 5-year runs. But when you have all your soils, all your fields right in front of you, then it's real easy to start to compare them, and you start to see the differences. That's best. It's a pretty nice process.
Simple.
Simple, I like it.
Yeah.
I like simple.
That's why we added it.
And then the grasslands, so we bring the herds together. The sheep and the yearlings here were not commingled that day. Some days they are. And then we have the scale, so we'll weigh them after every forage change. So if we come off of a forage, we're going to go to a new field, we'll weigh them first. Okay? And then we know the weights for the gains per day, and we know the pounds of beef per acre. And they come in, we got a little bit of a bud box in here, and they'll come in here on an electronic scale, and we'll record them and give them a treat when they come out. And this is the last one I used. I liked it. They're all native plants, and it can give you a pretty nice profile. Perennials build circles. So we're in glacial. It's called Glacial Lake McKenzie. So Lake Agassiz was Fargo, the big flat. Okay, that was Glacial Lake Agassiz. We were Glacial Lake McKenzie, but it helped us build these soils like you see here. And this alfalfa plant, that root went down along the side, and it was open all summer long, and it went right out the bottom of the pit, and it never died. It just kept growing. So the livestock addition's been huge. I mean, this is what we're mimicking right here, but now you can see on this photo how the sheep went inside the yearlings. That day they were inside. And so it varies, but they've been a huge impact on what we do. And then outreach, MenokenFarm.com. Our YouTube channel is called Menoken Farm Creatively. And we just added a fiber optics line to the farm. So we'll be able to transmit our water monitors directly to the brains in the pole. And then from there they can go to the fiber optics. And we can run them on cable access TV locally, and we can do all these kind of things down the road. So that just got added, and we're in the process of securing that. The tours and the outreach and things like we just did the last day or two, I can't tell you how important they are.
So why'd you name it Menoken Farm and not call it Burley
So
County?
why was it named Menoken Farm? So when it started in 2009, we all got to contribute the names that we thought it should be. And we had 20 names. Okay, so now we have to boil it down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate them all until we boil it down to the name I want. Because that's how this works. So
stand for you.
So I had an ace. And the ace was I had dug out an old atlas. And this old atlas, so it's located next to Menoken, North Dakota, which has maybe 3 or 4 houses in it. Okay? And so the old atlas explained how each community got their name in the county. And Menoken got its name from the Native American language that meant you reap what you sow. So I waited in the board meeting, and I waited because the timing wasn't quite right. You know, I'm going to play my ace. And then when the time was right and we had this kind of narrowed down a bit more, I played the ace and I had the copy of the old atlas, and I said, you know, this would be honoring Native Americans, it would be honoring the community, it would just fit. And so we adopted the name. And that's how I got the name Menoken Farm. 20 different names were proposed. They were all good. They were all good names, but there was only one really good. I thought it should be. Anyway, that's how that portion happened. Okay? So, a good read for you in Kansas is The Buffalo Harvest. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. It really explains what they did and how they reacted. And Frank Meyer was an individual that ran a hunt. Well, it's not really a hunting party, but he slaughtered more of them than anyone else. Okay, so he shot a huge amount. And he has a really interesting, he wrote the book. And so it's an interesting read. He isn't bragging about it, and he's not apologizing about it. And he says that in the book. He said, I'm just telling you what I did to make a living. And so it's an interesting read. If you get a chance, I would read that one. It helps you understand your area, if you will. They're all good reads. And so consequently, that's kind of the end of the portion on Menoken Farm. And I think in terms of, you know, it's a conservation demonstration farm, so you want to have different aspects when different groups come for different reasons. And so when gardeners come, you need some gardening. When the compost people come, should have some compost. When the cropping people come and they want to talk nutrient management or no-till systems or cover crop integration, you should have some. So we always have a full season cover crop field, because the interesting thing is when people come, they don't care what time of year it is, they want to walk into a cover crop. Okay?
Right.
They might be there really early, really late, really whenever. They want to see a cover crop. Okay, so we try to have a full season cover crop at least one field. I've seen everything imaginable occur with these groups when they step into a cover crop combination. I've seen them just lay down in it. I've seen them take selfies in it. I've seen them walk in, close their eyes, and listen to the insects and birds. They're just connecting. You know? It's really pretty amazing just to observe the people, you know, as they go into it, especially if they're not accustomed to it.
Now you should offer earthing, where you have them take their shoes off
Well,
and let them walk out there.
we're North
Do they?
Dakotans. We draw the line someplace.
Come on, man.
We're pretty conservative. You better keep your shoes on.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to
Yeah.
watch them and connect. I think they're really connecting with nature is what they're doing. So all these things that occur, and of course then the grazers. So with the grazing, our grazing coalition locally, we always try to have a grazing system in place. We do daily moves, except on weekends. We'll give them 2 days because the young man said he needs a life and moves the livestock. So we allow him to stretch out the acres a bit, and he gets 2 days of forage over the weekend. And but normally we move them every day. We try to move based on bricks, so we like a little higher bricks reading on the plants, and that means you're going to move closer to noon. And so once photosynthetic rate at noonish is more ramped up, that's when we like to move. And so consequently, it's a lot of moving parts, but these are items that allow us to take a look at our road and where we've been and what we can, you know, what can we realistically build into it for resilience. So, Tyrell, we're going to turn it back to you, or
Anybody have any other
we can
questions
have
today?
some. If you have any questions, I'd be happy